Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. I have my co-host Tim with me, so that can only mean one thing. What could it mean, Tim?
Pain and suffering.
I thought you'd go with something like that. For me, yes.
Yeah, for you. Yeah.
No, it does mean that it is Q&A time, so that time of the month where we have a multi-part series where we answer your questions. So we're going to go do exactly that almost right now. Mm-hmm. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Gigabyte and their latest range of AMD Radeon RX 9060 XT, 9070 and 9070 XT graphics cards, along with their AMD B850 motherboards. The gaming series utilizes Gigabyte's WindForce cooling system, delivering exceptional thermal performance via a large triple fan cooler featuring Hawks fans, composite copper heat pipes, and a copper base plate. The 9070 XT is also available in the Elite range, offering an even larger cooler, dual BIOS support, and RGB halo effects. All models will pair nicely with one of the many B850 motherboards Gigabyte has on offer, such as the excellent value B850 Eagle Wi-Fi 6E. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. What are your thoughts on the RTX 5050 that was just revealed? I almost didn't even know this thing was just revealed. I woke up and I was like, oh, so it is officially a thing now?
It is official. It is on the NVIDIA website. They've kind of done even more of a silent launch than the 5060, where they did pre-brief media on the 5060. 5050 though, they're like, we're sick of you guys talking about 8 gig cards. So we'll just quickly run through what NVIDIA has announced, considering we haven't talked about on the channel before. So this is a brand new GPU. I think it's a new GPU die as well, using GB207 that hasn't been used before. 2560 CUDA cores. It's got 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, so not G7 like all the other 50 series products. So the older spec, 128-bit memory bus. Looking at a boost clock of 2.57 gigahertz according to NVIDIA. And then you're going to be getting, I think, about 320 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, 130 watt TDP. And it'll be retailing for $249 US and will be available in the second half of July. So not a firm release date there, but I imagine it's like the 5060, they'll start filtering out at a certain date later in July. So yeah, it's your classic low-cost GPU, really.
Doesn't sound like it's going to be particularly good. Initial thoughts pretty easy to get off our chest on that one. We basically said any GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM released in 2025 is crap and should cost less than $200 US, though as we progress further throughout the year and we see more examples of games that really require more than 8 gigabytes to be fully enjoyed, probably less than $200 US, probably nearing 150 now, I would say. It's probably a thing that we really shouldn't still be seeing in 2025. It's kind of crazy that we're still getting these 8 gigabyte cards. An entry-level 5050 probably is... You can kind of turn a blind eye to it, I suppose, compared to like a 5060 Ti. I still think it shouldn't happen, period.
I feel like you can't at $250. If this was a true old school entry-level card, when cards were used to be $80 at the low end, which again, adjust that for inflation and let's call it $150, then yeah, you could sort of turn a blind eye to it. But this is going to be probably the most popular 50 series model. It's going to be in all the pre-builts. It's going to be probably the top card on the Steam charts, which is something that people use to justify 8 gig models. So, yeah, well, I mean...
to speculate about the performance, I made a couple of notes here. So to try and put it into context and work out roughly where it will land, the 5060 has 25% more cores than the 4060, and on average in our testing it was like 20% faster, so 25%
reasonable
more
scaling.
Cores. Yeah, reasonable scaling, better bandwidth and all that sort of stuff. So the margins vary, but that's an average across 18 games. Now the 5050 has 17% fewer cores than the 4060.
Okay.
So there's a few ways you can look at this. One comparison I think probably would best summarize it. The 5060 should be at least 30% faster than the 5050 on average, based on the specifications we've seen, and that would make the 5050 slightly faster than an RTX 3060. Somewhere in there, probably similar in terms of performance to like an RX 7600.
Right, so sort of like maybe it won't be quite as good as a 4060 from the last gen, which was a $300 card, and now they're selling maybe something slightly worse for $250.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Also, the RX 7600, that was a $270 US product at MSRP. Definitely sold for that. I think it got down to 250, maybe even 240 in some instances. I'm certain it was selling for 250.
It was for periods, yeah.
So if it ends up delivering similar performance to an RX 7600, then, well, the RX 7600, how do I put this? It was a pretty crap product. We didn't like it. Big miss there from Radeon. So if the 5050 is only roughly matching that or even just slightly beating it, the headline writes itself on that one. It's not going to be a good product.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of NVIDIA's performance charts where they were sort of, listing esports titles in their list of... Obviously, there was the frame generation stuff, which we're just going to ignore because misleading, but they had some... I think Overwatch was in one of their charts, maybe Counter-Strike, and obviously they're going to try position a 5050 as being that sort of mainstream everyday gaming card for the most popular games on the market. I don't really know whether gamers should be buying brand new $250 cards to play those games. I know there will be some people who obviously will want a new GPU instead of a used GPU, but it doesn't sound like an overly compelling, like, oh, you must buy that to play Overwatch. I don't know what the prices are of used 3060s, used 4060s, but it can't be as high as $250 at this point, surely. Like, surely you're getting those sorts of models for less, in which case, yeah, if you were playing mainstream games like that, you may as well just buy an old used card. You'll probably get the same sort of experience for less.
Yeah, the disappointing aspect is it seems like you probably could have got this level of performance for this price years ago. So that obviously is disappointing. But then people get upset about that and say, yeah, well, it's no good telling me I should have bought this product 2 years ago because I can't go back in time and do that. So I understand that. But even in the current market, so you can get like an RX 9060 XT, 8GB, which I don't think you should buy that product. I think it's pretty garbage. But let's just say it is for esports. The VRAM thing's not really relevant. So that product is supposed to be $300 US. It's $50 more. It should be substantially faster. But I guess $50 is $50, so...
Yeah, and I mean, I personally would be expecting an RX 9060 non-XT to be released at some point, just because we haven't seen any bin silicon from Navi 44. I imagine...
It'll be... But I would never tell anyone to hold out for that product. It's going to be equally garbage.
Possibly, but I mean, if you've got two $250 cards that are both garbage, wouldn't you want to buy the less garbage model? I mean...
I guess.
I mean, you were just talking about buying a 9060 XT 8GB, which is also garbage. So,
it is quite a bit faster. I think when they're equally garbage, like say the Radeon GPU is 10% faster, I would get the NVIDIA GPU for the esports games, because typically speaking, in my experience, the NVIDIA drivers, even though, look, NVIDIA drivers have been shambles as of recently. They haven't been good. But when it comes to performance and stability, generally speaking, games like, Fortnite, Counter-Strike, probably Valorant, Apex, those sort of games, the NVIDIA drivers generally result in a better experience, whereas I've seen a lot more stuttering and those sort of issues with the Radeon GPUs, despite overall performance being competitive. So I think... The Radeon offering would have to be notably better for me to recommend it. And at the end of the day, again, it's hard to get excited about when you're recommending two crap products, like the RTX 4060, crap product, the RX 7600, crap product. So
yeah, I agree. I think the only way AMD would have some sort of competitive or obviously much better product would be if their RX 9060 came with more than 8GB of VRAM, which I don't expect would happen. But if it did, that would be an obvious sort of way to avoid that situation that you were talking about, where you're just choosing between a bunch of not great options. But that's the mainstream market these days. We're sort of... It seemed like around $400 there's been stagnation for a while, and now it's improved a little bit with the 9060 XT 16GB being available as an option, but for the still the very low price points, which again, it's sad. $250 is now considered the lowest of the low price point. But it seems like we're back to stagnation there.
It's sad because the products suck. It seems very much like overall it's not going to be that much faster than an RTX 3060. and that GPU had 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's many years old now. And I think that product was $330 US MSRP, if I recall.
It would have been $330, but like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So inflation and
Sure.
all that sort of thing. But
what I'm getting at is it wasn't like it was $500. It wasn't.
But you got a 3050 8 gigabyte back then, and I know NVIDIA's claiming that this new model is supposedly quite a bit faster than the 3050, but you would expect that 4 years later.
Well, the 3050 is not what you'd be comparing it to anyway. You'd be comparing it to a 4060. It's $50 cheaper than a 4060. Come on, it's not much of a generational improvement. So anyway, I don't know when we'll be getting one or how we'll be getting one, but rest assured we will get one, and we'll compare it to all of those GPUs we just spoke of and more, and we'll let you know what we think of it.
What do we know about the AM6 socket, and at what point do you think it's better to wait for AM6 rather than build a new AM5 system? I think this is very forward-looking.
We don't even know what it's going to be called. Presumably AM6.
I imagine it'll be AM6 for DDR6. I just don't think at this point we should be really considering like waiting for the next generation motherboard platform from AMD. I think there will be another CPU generation on AM5. So I think Zen 6 pretty clear at this point will be on that platform. I don't want to say 100% sure, but I think it's very likely that it will be. And I'm not expecting those CPUs until late 2026. So if you're talking about another generation after that, like a Zen 7 or something, you're probably talking about 2027, 2028. And at that point, it's like you're not really going to be waiting through, like putting your purchase on hold for 3 years to wait for AM7. Zen 7 on AM6. So, I just don't. I think you should be largely basing your purchasing decisions on the products that we have today, the platform that's available today.
Yeah, my assumption would be you're on AM4 if you're asking this question, and you've probably got something like a 5700X3D or 5800X3D. You've probably maxed out that platform, would be my guess if we're talking about gaming here. Those CPUs still perfectly usable, perfectly fine. So I wouldn't be rushing to AM5 unless you felt you need to. And I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? If you're making do okay with what you've got, probably just stick with that. But if you want more performance, then jump to AM5. But then the jump to AM5 would be costly if you do have like a 5700X3D, because you can't really buy, like if you're going to AM5 from a slower, lower end system that really needed upgrading, I would recommend the Ryzen 5 7600, or in particular the 7500F. They're really cheap now. I think I saw them for like $130 US. They're very cheap in Australia as well. So that's a great CPU. DDR5 memory is very affordable now. AM5 motherboards, there's plenty of affordable options. So you can build a pretty competent gaming system there. Really a very competent gaming system with that hardware, relatively cheap. But if you're coming from a 5800X3D, that's basically a 7600 in terms of performance. So, and there's not much point going to like a 7700 or a 9700 or whatever it is you want to get. You've really got to go for a 7800X3D. I think that would be the natural upgrade from a 5800X3D, would be a 78 or a 98. And then you're getting, that's really expensive. So you're spending a lot of money, which I wouldn't say don't do that. It just depends on what you're after and what you need to upgrade to. There's quite a few things to think about there. But yeah, if you're asking the question, probably wait at this point in time and see what happens.
Will 10-core CPUs become the minimum spec for games in the near future? A few games are already starting to require 8-core CPUs already. I'm guessing when this question says requiring 8-core CPUs, they mean like the recommended spec tables that you would see on Steam, for example, which is not necessarily a physical, like the game will not run if you don't have 8 cores. It's just a recommendation about the performance level. But obviously there are games today where the recommended CPU in those tables are 8-core CPUs. So yeah, this is the classic cores versus performance thing, right? Like I don't think, have you seen examples where like 6-core CPUs don't let you load games?
Games will never and have never required a certain amount of cores. They require a certain amount of processing power. Now, for some CPUs, they may require a certain amount of cores to meet that threshold, which is why we've seen really powerful, say, 6-core CPUs still work really well for gaming, because the 6 cores are really powerful. So it really comes down to how much overall power you have within that package, whether it be 4 cores, 6 cores, 8 cores, 10 cores, and so on. Having said that, the other part that complicates this is games can use a certain amount of cores. They can be parallelized to a certain degree. So there can be games that will utilize 16 cores if you have 16 cores available, which is great because if you have a relatively old or even an old, let's say 16 core CPU, you can probably still get decent performance. They can be primary thread bound, which can limit performance, that sort of stuff. But it just means older CPUs with higher core counts will possibly still deliver good performance. Now, that doesn't mean you need 16 cores though. It just means that, yeah, like I said, but you can get newer 6-core CPUs that are much more powerful. And although the game can spread the load across 16 cores quite evenly, with a 6-core CPU, it doesn't need to do that. So it can fit what it would do across multiple cores on one core, because that one core is faster than multiple cores. If I'm sort of making sense here.
Yeah.
So it's quite a complicated topic, and there's a few different ways of looking at it, which is why gamers constantly don't really understand the core count thing with games. And there's, like, I'm very much oversimplifying it. There's a lot more to this, but essentially games do not require a certain core count. Now, again, where it gets complicated is you can say, well, quad cores aren't powerful enough for gaming. Like, you need more than 4 cores. Games require more than 4 cores. It's sort of, it's a technically true thing. It's true because we don't have any quad core CPUs that are powerful enough to run games to match what we see from 6 and 8 core CPUs. But if you took the 9800X 3D, for example, and were able to disable half the cores in that CPU, it'd still be a very powerful, very competent quad-core CPU. But there's just no quad-core CPUs that are that powerful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think in the future you will see the game requirements list 10-core CPUs, but what you should be looking at is not the core count of those processors, but the performance level that they're trying to indicate. So if they said something like, oh, you need a
3700X, for example.
3700X or 5700X, that doesn't mean you need an 8-core CPU. It just means you need at least the power, the processing power that CPU will deliver, which on a modern AM5 CPU would be a 6-core CPU.
Yeah, like a 7600X, for example, is more powerful than a 5800X when you're measuring the overall power of the CPU. So if you use a Cinebench type benchmark, for example, which is a crude way of doing this because, again, we've seen the X3D CPUs complicate that discussion. It used to be simple that you could just use a synthetic benchmark to measure the overall CPU performance, but there are many more aspects to what delivers a good gaming experience. So anyway, core count isn't necessarily relevant for gaming performance, I guess is the best way to put it.
Do premium models of the 9070 XT have large differences in performance compared to the standard 9070 XT?
The old age premium versus the base model. No. I was going to say short answer, but really it's the only answer. The answer is no. To give a specific example, the Sapphire Nitro Plus, which I believe is probably the most high-end or one of the most high-end 9070 XTs, it's like 3% faster on average than the Pulse, which is an MSRP base model from Sapphire. So really you shouldn't be seeing more than, a couple of percent. I think 5% is usually a typical difference between the premium OC models, and they're only 5% faster because they're overclocked by, 7% or something out of the box, which results in about a 5% performance uplift. So you could overclock the Pulse to match the Nitro Plus.
Yeah, so why would you spend all that money then on a Nitro Plus? Is it just the cooler? You're like looking for like a more silent cooling design, or it looks better physically for your system? Like they are significantly more expensive, so there's got to be a reason.
If they're significantly more expensive, there is no reason. You would only do it if back in my days, they were, when it was a $400 card, you might have paid $450. So it's a $50 premium, which is still a reasonable premium. But a lot of people are like, well, I'm going for the best. I want the best product, so I'm going to spend that premium and get the nicer one. And the perks are, some cards will go from not having a dual BIOS feature to a dual BIOS feature, which I quite like. You will get a bigger, beefier cooler. Like, it's not like they're not doing anything. It's just that when you talk about the resulting FPS performance, they're kind of doing nothing. They're doing very little. But when it comes to like operating volumes, temperatures, all that sort of stuff, you are getting a bigger slab of aluminium. Like you can weigh the difference. So that the Nitro Plus will be quite a bit heavier than the Pulse, which means, you know, lower fan speeds for the same or better temperatures. So just cooler operation, all that sort of stuff. They look cooler. You know, they add some RGB effects, which Tim loves.
Oh man, rainbow mode all the way.
He loves it. So, but yeah, if there's a huge premium, they're just a bit silly and not worth it, especially for your mid-range products. You really just want to get the cheapest thing possible, because if you go get a premium model, you probably could have got a performance tier up, which is a bit silly, so you'd be better off doing that. We see the same thing with these 5060 Ti and 9060 XT cards. The premium, dare I say it, 8GB models cost more than the base model 16GB cards, which is just ludicrous.
Terrible deal.
Yeah, it does. So anyway, I would typically recommend getting the sort of base MSRP to the mid-range, because sometimes the base MSRP models can be a bit crap. They can have really lightweight coolers. They are, you know, the fans will spin up to nearly 2,000 RPM or something like that. So you just got to watch reviews on them and see. But, you know, there's a lot of good, sensible, sort of more base model cards.
I miss the days where the base model cards were the blower cards. So it really was worth paying like a premium to get, you know, something that wasn't a jet engine. But these days you just don't see blowers anymore.
Tim misses the days when the affordable cards were garbage. They were the good old days. Loved it.
I always enjoy, because I always used to buy the base models regardless of whether they're a blower or not. I just love that time when you turn on your PC.
You load up a game.
It really fires up. You feel the power of your system.
You're sitting there and you're like, this is all quite nice and pleasant. Then you execute your game and you hear... Yeah. Tim's like,
now I know I'm gaming, right? Yeah, good times.
High power mode enabled.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, do you specifically have any thoughts on the rumored NVIDIA CPU? Because I don't have too many thoughts. I'm relying on you to carry this segment. So depending on how well this does, I think it's all on Tim's shoulders.
Look, I don't have too many thoughts on it. Obviously, it's been, you know, rumored and leaked for a while now that NVIDIA is coming up with some sort of like desktop CPU, or maybe a CPU that will be available for desktops and laptops built using ARM cores or something. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised NVIDIA is trying to get into something like the CPU market. They're very much a company that wants to control everything. If you see on their server side of things, you know, they try and make, you just buy a whole rack of everything. It comes with all the networking, the CPU, the graphics, everything. So it makes sense that NVIDIA would want, you know, a slice of that pie, trying to make a ridiculously expensive desktop CPU for some use cases. Whether or not it's going to be for gaming, I mean, which is the thing that we really care about. I mean, they're talking about like a 20-core ARM CPU. Is that going to be good for gaming? No idea. I mean, they're talking about pairing it with some sort of reasonably powerful, you know, integrated graphics using GeForce IP. It kind of sounds like those mobile parts where, you know, I think AMD's got like a big APU sort of thing, which is good, you know, to an extent. But for desktop gamers, like, I don't think people are going to be rushing out to buy a Strix Halo gaming system. People just buy the individual components. So, yeah, I think it's interesting from a standpoint that, like, if NVIDIA comes up with a CPU, then all three of the vendors will have both CPUs and GPUs. And that's just interesting, especially if they're trying to do something that's very different, not going x86.
But the NVIDIA CPUs won't be the same as the competitor CPUs, in the sense that you can't just, like, to make it clear to the people listening, you can't just slot it into your desktop PC and run Windows 11 and, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's possibly the case. If it is one of those big APU-style systems where, you know, the memory is part of the package, I'm sure you'll be able to buy boards that have it included on it, but it won't be like a socketed design, especially if it requires, you know, high bandwidth. You know,
but even if it's an ARM-based solution, you're going to be using like Linux or something like that.
There's Windows on ARM now, but whether or not that's good is another question.
I don't know for sure. Last I looked into it, it wasn't good, but, you know, could be wrong on that one. It's not really something I look into too much. So,
yeah, I mean, there's like Qualcomm laptops that use Windows on ARM, which are, you know, people have varying opinions on how good the compatibility is and stuff like that. I think for gaming, it's been proven that they're not that great. So, again, like, I would imagine NVIDIA is probably more targeting like workstations with a CPU so that they can sort of advertise AI and all that stuff. Like, oh, we've got our 20-core CPU plus AI, and then you can buy a nice little AI desktop or something.
To be clear, I'm not saying you can't do Linux gaming or anything, so you Linux freaks, because that's what I'm going to call you. Because
Reddit is going to be so mad.
whenever we talk about Linux and we don't say the exact right thing and praise the Linux gods, they lose their minds. It is definitely coming along, but obviously there's some clear limitations for games that can and can't be played and multiplayer titles and stuff like that. But those hurdles can be overcome, because we do not like Windows. Do you like Windows?
No, not really.
Cool. Okay,
it's
good.
more of a tolerating it because you're kind of forced to, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. So anyway, calm down, Linux freaks. Just chill. Nobody cares that much. Just chill.
Oh, no. So, yeah. NVIDIA coming out with CPU, interesting from a hardware perspective, interesting to see what they do. And if it genuinely comes out and it's good for gaming, then that just adds competition to the market, especially where Intel is kind of stagnating a bit in that front. So more competition is good, but I don't think this will be a gaming targeted product to begin with. So we'll just have to wait and see how things play out on that front. Crystal ball time. Should have brought the crystal ball.
Yeah, you haven't brought that lump of a thing. That thing is so heavy.
Yeah.
Probably why I haven't brought it. You should just bring it and leave it here since we do the Q&As here all the time.
Yeah, that's true. All right, crystal ball time. With Zen 6 likely arriving with a 12-core CCD, do you think AMD will shift 6-core models down to revive the Ryzen 3 lineup? Will they discontinue them and leave last-gen parts as the budget offering, or something else? Yeah, so I guess if there's a 12-core CCD and they still do dual CCD designs, you'd be looking at like 24 cores at the top. You probably cut down a part to 16, with two CCDs.
Yep.
Probably then a 12 is the single CCD model, then probably an 8. So I think 6 cores would probably die at that point on the AMD side of things. That's just a guess, though, because we haven't really seen, like, the equivalent this generation would be like a Ryzen 3 quad core, but that isn't really a thing, is it?
They can't do quad cores anymore, because the 6 cores are already so cheap. There's no money to be made there. They're still trying to squeeze in the APUs as well, which are so it's more, they're not reducing the core count anymore. It's more like the L3 cache and stuff like that they're cutting down on to save costs. So, I don't think there'll be a quad core anymore. And by the time we get around to that, I think the 6 cores probably won't be a thing either. They're also not, at least at this point in time, as incentivized as they were in the Ryzen 3 days to really compete aggressively at the low end, because the high-end stuff's helping sell the low-end stuff, and also Intel's not really competitive there at all. Their current generation stuff, generally speaking, like the dirt cheap price points we used to see, they're still not hitting, and they're trying to target that with previous generation parts on what are essentially dead platforms, which... Are you wanting to invest in an LJ 1700 to pick up like a Core i5 or something like that, or a Core i3?
Yeah, I think what AMD will do is do what they've done, with the AM4 era as well, when it sort of got towards the end of the lifespan, which is if you do want something below sort of that Ryzen 5 tier, all the pricing is just the older models, which makes a lot more sense because, a 6-core Zen 6 processor probably would be as powerful, best case is like an 8-core Zen 5 or something like that, in which case they may as well just sell you an 8-core model from the previous lineup or something along those lines in a sort of cheaper price point. And those CPUs would then be plentiful at that part. And that's something that the long platform support gives. Back on those old Intel platforms that you were talking about, they kind of had to make those, Core i3 processors, now the Core Ultra 3s, because you couldn't just use the old generation parts on that platform. You had to make a new CPU. Whereas today, they could be offering as far back as the Ryzen 7000 series for the cheaper price points, and that would work on all the motherboards that would be supporting the Zen 6 lineup. So really, the only parts they should be making, as far as Zen 6 is concerned, are things that offer new capabilities that you couldn't get with the older models. So I think, an 8-core would make sense because you'd want 8 cores for gaming plus the higher IPC that would hopefully be coming with Zen 6. But when you're talking about those cut down models, unless they made like a different, smaller piece of silicon that was cheaper to manufacture, I just don't think, as you said, the binning would allow them to save that much. So those parts are just not viable.
And this is highlighting another glaring problem with this outdated strategy from Intel, where, as you say, they have to offer all of those CPUs on the new platform because there's no other way to get onto the new platform, but they're not really able to do that because of costs and whatnot. So they're still keeping the previous platform alive, or platforms alive, really, because I don't think we've seen them selling those older generation CPUs as aggressively as they are today in previous generations. But they kind of have to. But it's extremely what's compelling you to go and buy it into a dead platform? Because if you're buying a new PC, you're buying the motherboard, the memory, the CPU, the whole lot. Whereas I can't see a reason why you wouldn't just go AM5 with like a 7500F or 7600, and then you've got the ability to upgrade all the way to a 9800X 3D or presumably the upcoming Zen 6 CPUs. And you're not saving any money by going Intel anyway, so it's pretty confusing. It's a very problematic strategy for Intel. Probably going to have to change that for upcoming generations if AMD keeps doing at least 3 generations on a socket. But we'll see how that plays out for this one. And yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, we're going to hit pause there on part 1, or we're going to end part 1, pause for part 2, which will be coming up on the channel in a few days. Have a bit of a break, let Balin edit this one, get it out there for you guys, and there'll be more to come. But yeah, some good questions as usual. A couple of new products and things coming up, so we got to answer some questions about that. But anyway, that is going to do it for part 1 of the June Q&A. Did you enjoy yourself, Tim?
I always do. Yeah, it was a good time.
Good, yeah. Well, I always ask you, and you always enjoy it. So good to see that trend continuing. I look forward. Actually, I was going to say,
you look forward to the time I don't enjoy it? Is that what you were going to say?
Well, perhaps. Anyway, we'll end it there. Thanks for watching. And we have the usual. There's the YouTube stuff. There's also the the join button, Patreon, all that stuff there. Won't go into that for this one. You get a short outro. How good's that? Just
Is it short though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can make it long. Do you want to continue?
No, I've got nothing else to say.
Are you trying to make a liar of me, Tim?
Yeah, well, I think you already did lie, but then it's fine.
Shorter. It's a sort of a relative term. It's shorter than normal.
Well, it's not definitely not short now.
Well, I think it still might just be on the shorter side of some of our outros where we go back and forth for a bit. Anyway, I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.